This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.
Welcome to this edition of PHRC Speaks, Fair Housing in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Adrian Garcia, Director of Enforcement for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Technology has become so popular that society in many instances substitutes its judgment for that of machine learning programs or AI. The big issue with this is that it has been proven to marginalize populations that historically have been kept out of housing and employment opportunities. An AI program can screen out employment candidates simply because of where they live or because their last name may present as ethnic. Many will remember the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development versus Facebook. In that case, Facebook's ad algorithm used personal data to deploy targeted housing advertisements that discriminated against African Americans, Hispanics, and Asian users. According to the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, these AI programs can generate misleading, incorrect information that raises the cost and barriers to high-quality housing for people of color. In 2021, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, launched an agency-wide initiative to ensure that the use of software, including artificial intelligence, AI, machine learning, and other emerging technologies used in hiring and other employment decisions comply with the federal civil rights laws that EEOC enforces. Our guest today, Keith E. Sonderling, was confirmed by the U.S. Senate by a partisan vote to be commissioner on the EEOC in 2020. Until January of 2021, he served as Commission's vice chair. His term expires on July 2024. Since joining the EEOC, one of Commissioner Sonderling's highest priorities is ensuring that artificial intelligence and workplace technologies are designed and deployed consistent with long-standing civil rights laws. He has published numerous articles on the benefits and potential harms of using artificial intelligence-based technology in the workplace and speaks globally on these emerging issues. Commissioner Sonderling received his BS from the University of Florida and his JD from Nova Southeastern University. And I assure you that we are only scratching the surface of his many accolades and recognitions. Welcome to the PHRC Speaks, and thank you for being here, Commissioner.
Hey, and thank you so much for having me. And first, I really want to thank you and all the work you do in Pennsylvania. You know, at the EEOC, we are a nationwide organization, but we rely on our Fair Employment Practice Agency's partners to help us enforce the law around the country. We can't do it by ourselves. And because of the unbelievable relationship we really have with partners like at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, we are able to do our job and make sure that victims of discrimination are able to have their rights be enforced by not only the federal government, but by state government. So I just want to thank you for all the hard work you do and make sure that everyone knows out there that we don't do it alone here in Washington, D.C., and that we rely on our wonderful partners like you to help meet our mission.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Now, I mentioned in my opening that since joining the EEOC, one of your highest priorities has been to ensure that artificial intelligence and workplace technologies are designed, deployed consistent with long-standing civil rights laws. Why did you decide to make this your priority as commissioner?
Well, as you know, it's so easy to get distracted by what's going on in the news. And the employment agencies like ours, we really have to be there for employees. So when the Me Too movement happened, right, we had to focus all of our efforts on preventing and remedying sexual harassment in the workplace. A big push for pay equity. We had to make sure that people are being paid fairly. Then COVID happened, and we had to make sure that disabled workers were getting their accommodations and all other workers were properly being in the workforce during COVID times without being discriminated against, right? So it's so easy to continue to get distracted by what's happening. Of course, we have to do that. But when I got here, I really said, what are the emerging issues? Where are workplace trends going? Where is human resources going? And where are companies going on managing the workforce? And that's when I learned about the proliferation of artificial intelligence in the workplace. And like many, I said, well, can't be happening now. This is a futuristic dystopian workplace where there's these robots displacing human workers. So when a lot of people think about that, they're like, well, we're not there yet. Or it's only going to be certain industries like manufacturing, maybe logistics, not the whole workplace as a whole. But when then I started diving into it, I realized that AI and machine learning for years have been involved in every single part of the job decision-making process, from hiring, from where a lot of the conversations are, to promoting, to determining your salary, to determining where you're going to work, to determining your trajectory within your organization, to determining your performance review, and then even some AI out there that telling employees that they're fired. And this was happening now and continues to happening, and nobody was really talking about it. Agencies were really dealing with a lot of other issues, but maybe we're a little hesitant to dive into this very complicated topic that us understanding employment laws, understanding housing laws may not be as familiar with. And the fear of, well, now we're not technology regulators. This is going to be for somebody else. Nobody else is ever coming along. This was on us. And when I learned digging through all of this, and we'll talk about it, through the complicated algorithms, through the complicated technologies, at the end of the day, these tools are either assisting or making employment decisions. But they haven't been able to come up with a new type of employment decision yet. So that's what we know. That's what the EEOC knows. That's what you know at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission is employment decisions and results. And is there bias in these decisions?
Right.
And that's what we've always investigated, and that's what we know. And that's what our strong point is. And that's where we really could play a huge role in this whole equation in making sure that employers who are buying this software and deploying it understand what their longstanding obligations are to their employees, and the employees being subject to this technology understand what their civil rights are related to this technology. But what's different here is now we have other stakeholders involved in this ecosystem now. Mm-hmm. So our world has always been employers, employees, unions, staffing agencies, right? That's what we know best. But now you have these tech entrepreneurs who want to get involved in our space, who see that there's significant issues in HR, in employment decision-making since the beginning of time, and that's bias. And how do we now create software to eliminate that? But when you're dealing with civil rights in the workplace, or for in your case, housing as well, it's a much different equation that takes a lot more care because you're dealing with humans' livelihoods, humans' ability to thrive and provide for their family. So that's why, a long-winded way of saying, that's why I made it a priority. That's why the EEOC and throughout the federal government now there's initiatives of it, because we have to address it now. Because whether you're aware of it or not, if you're in the workforce, you're going to be dealing with this technology.
Sure. I mean, we're not dealing with that movie I, Robot. I mean, that's a far advanced version of it. We're dealing with something that's underneath the surface and carries a lot of disparate impact as a result. So, and you gave me a little bit of this, but let's discuss the history of AI. I mean, how did we get here? Where is it going? And you talked a little bit about that, the current state of it, but where do you see it going? I know that as you dig into it, you're finding more and more interesting things about it. So I'd like to. And
that's what's tricky for us. So many people just want to talk about, ChatGPT and generative AI because it's the hottest thing because everyone can use it and play with it and touch it. But for our agencies, AI is much more than just the hiring part. Much more about reviewing resumes. It's every function within HR. There's a product out there that is being sold to create those functions, to do those functions with less bias, with more transparency. And I think it's really important to take a step back and say, okay, well, what are we dealing with now? What have we dealt with since the civil rights laws were enacted in the 1960s? And that's, you talk so much about the fear of the black box of algorithms, right? Well, we've been dealing with the human brain for a long time. And when a human makes an employment decision, you don't know if they're making that employment decision because that candidate is the most qualified for that position, or if there's bias and they don't want to hire females, or if they don't want to hire African Americans or Hispanic Americans. You just name the protected characteristics. So in a sense, it's been difficult for us to see if human decision-making has been without bias or not, right? So let's just start with the technology we've been dealing with, the human brain for a long time. And that's really, when you talk about some of the history of this, that's the problem these entrepreneurs were trying to solve. The biggest issue in HR is the human. So how do we eliminate the human? And I've been saying that if AI is carefully used, properly designed, it can actually help eliminate bias in the workplace. It can actually help us get to a place where there's less discrimination and people are actually getting in the workforce based upon their skills, based upon their merit, and actually getting that equal employment opportunity, which is the mission of our agencies. But all you have to do is flip that and say, if it's not carefully designed or improperly used, then it could scale discrimination far greater than any one individual human. And that's the risk in all this. That's the fear in all of this, is that how it's going to be used. And is it actually going to scale bias or reduce bias? Because let's not forget, these algorithms, these robots, they don't know how to discriminate, right? They're not misogynistic. They're not racist in a sense. That they're being told what to do. And there's two ways to get there. It's either that your data bias, let's say that, and for me, for you, not in the computer world, and I don't mean to offend you if you are a computer scientist, but I know you're not. In a sense, what does that mean in our world? Well, what is the data set? That's your applicant pool, or that's your current workforce. And if that is made up of particularly one gender, one race, one national origin, what's going to happen? Is the computer sophisticated enough to say that, okay, well, the number one characteristic must be your protected characteristic of why you're in this pool, and that's why we select you. And we've seen examples of that with this AI data set bias in employment. And there's some kind of legendary stories in this where one of these companies went to an AI technology company and they said, and that company promised diversity, equity, inclusion related to their hiring. Okay. And they said, here's my best candidates, right? Here's my best employees. Go use your fancy machine learning. Go use your algorithm to find out what makes them so special. And then go find us many more of those. So the machine learning, the algorithms went through all their resumes, all their performance reviews, who they were. And it came back and said, okay, the most likely indicators of success at your company is being named Jared and having played high school lacrosse. And this was a program that was meant to diversify workers. And obviously the Jared high school lacrosse, situation probably is not very diverse. But why is that, right? Because likely the top performers of that organization, were made up of, Jareds who played lacrosse, and the computer wasn't sophisticated enough to say that, well, the underlying skill is this, opposed to, being a white male or whatever the situation was. And we've heard of other examples where, computers, algorithms are looked to see at all the applicants that are coming in and, to rate them, based upon their characteristics. And automatically, if you're a woman, you got the lowest score. And if you're a man, you got the highest score. And again, that wasn't an intent of the algorithm to discriminate. It was a function of what was being fed to the algorithm in the first place. And that's because the vast majority of applicants in that data set were men and not women, right? So you could see right away that disparate impact that it will have, even though you're buying these tools to diversify, even though you're buying these tools to take a skills-based approach to hiring and not have any of those characteristics come into play. They're coming into play unlawfully, and that's going to cause discrimination. And that's where the employers are going to be liable for. So that's an example of, how it works under our longstanding laws based upon that theory of disparate impact discrimination, where people are being discriminated. But the other part of it, and that goes into the poor design of it, right?
Right.
But say if it is properly designed, you get the most diverse applicant pool you could possibly get, right? You do all your outreach and hiring. That's indicative of your local hiring area, which is something we look at, right? To see that, are you making sure that that your applicant pool is based upon those people with characteristics from, a very diverse slate, especially for federal contractors.
Sure.
And so you have the perfect applicant pool. And then let's say somebody goes in there and now has access to these algorithms. And suddenly you have more data about your individual applicants or workers than you've ever had before. And now you could categorize them by race. You could categorize them by sex, by national origin, by age, which cannot obviously play into employment decision-making. And now with a few clicks, if you want to eliminate older worker, you could do it far quicker and faster than any one individual human looking at a resume. There's a long-standing statistic in talent acquisition that talent acquisition professionals have around 6.5 to 7 seconds to look at a resume, right? That's all you get. That's your whole chance. So if I have bias and I don't want to hire older female workers, and I'm not picking on anyone, just giving an easy to understand example, I have to go through, is this a female name? Is there any indication of their age? Is there any other indication that they may be in this group I don't like? Found one in the trash, right? So that takes a lot of time. But now with these tools, having that information with a few clicks in 0.7 seconds, you could eliminate hundreds of thousands or millions of workers based upon their protected characteristics. So you could see how these cases can spiral very quickly if somebody injects their bias and improperly uses these tools. So, those are two examples of where, the harm can come into these, either by, not being designed properly, like the examples I gave you about the pools being made up of one race, one national origin, too much and not being able to differentiate between that, or somebody going in and using high-tech discrimination by clicking on a few boxes. So you can see some of the harms there, even though these tools aren't being, essentially doing that by themselves. And I think that's really important, for those employers who want to use these, for these employees to be subject to that there's a lot of care that needs to go in. And I know those are two very basic examples, mainly on the hiring stage, that where our longstanding laws, our longstanding principles are going to look at those results. And if those results show discrimination, that employer is going to be liable, whether or not they intended to discriminate. So the discrimination from our law enforcement perspective is just as bad in either situation.
Is there a responsibility on the designer of the AI program? Because when corporations buy a program, they're looking at selling features, right? And so the ability to sparse out according to protected classes, for example, would they be liable? I know it's all script, so.
No. It's a great question, and it's a very serious question to discuss, because let's just take a step back.
Sure.
Who is going to invest in a product that violates civil rights? Who is going to develop a product that violates civil rights? Who's going to buy a product that violates civil rights? And who's going to want to be subjected to a product that violates civil rights? Nobody, right? Mm-hmm. So in that sense, right, you could see where there's a lot of market power here by the end users to ask the tough questions to make sure that the algorithms are designed properly and fairly, not to take into account any protected characteristics, and actually only take into account what the employer thinks is lawfully necessary in the job description, in the job advertisement for the employee to do the job based upon skill. So the question is, who is going to be liable for this? And under our laws, we only have jurisdiction over the employers, unions, and staffing agencies. Mm. And, these AI vendors, this is a whole new wrinkle in our world. Yeah. Because now, the employer is saying, well, we didn't make the employment decision. We bought this tool that promised us to take all the bias out of employment decision-making, to promise to diversify our workforce. And we spent a lot of money and we let it go. And look, we see that it's discriminated, but, EEOC, Pennsylvania, go after them. And that's not how it works, because our world is limited to the employers. Only the employers can make that employment decision. And that's the tricky part in this for the employers who want to buy these tools. And that's why that extra care and caution needs to go in, not only in questioning the vendors, but how you're going to implement it. Because unlike other technologies you're buying in your workplace, when it comes to civil rights, whether it's employment or housing, you can't have a set it and forget it approach to these technologies. Because of the risk of scaling discrimination, the risk of causing harm to your employees. So the knowing that the employer is going to be liable in this, and essentially the vendor is not, until some of these legal theories are tested further, that's going to be on the employer. And that's why they need to take so much care and caution, because there's no defense under federal law or Pennsylvania law that the robot made the decision. We didn't go after the robot. You are equally liable for making a decision, whether by humans or by robots. And that's why I'm out here. That's why we're having this discussion, is to ensure that before you ever let one of these tools make a decision on someone's livelihood, that you know the vendor, that you've gotten the assurances from the vendor that the tool is going to do what it's supposed to do and not discriminate. And how do you do that? By, testing, by training, by ensuring that the right people within your organization have access to these tools, and getting those assurances from the vendors that we're going to show you how this is going to work on your own employees before we actually allow it to make a decision to show that there's less bias, is really the market power these companies have with these vendors, is to show us you're not going to violate our civil rights, or we're not going to buy the product. So although vendors don't have liability specifically from us, they're not going to be able to sell their products unless the employers who are buying them really push back on them and require that level of compliance with the law that is required.
So, and you've given me a little bit of an idea of this, but can you give us an overview of how AI is currently being used for hiring and promotions and employment in general? What are some of the examples of these tools, or what are some of the advantages and what are some of the risks?
And I know we started off with the risks, right? But there is a lot of benefits to this if it's properly used and carefully designed. And let's just take a step back of why we have jobs, is that there's a bias in employment decision making. With the amount of charges that you all get, that we get every single year, bias in employment decision making has been around. So how can AI actually remove some of that human bias? And there's really basic statistics that haven't gone away. A male and a female resume apply for the same job. A male is more likely to get selected. Asian Americans and African Americans who whiten their resume by deleting any reference to their national origin, race, clubs, affiliations, schools are more likely to get selected without that on there than on them, right? So that has existed, but the AI doesn't know that. So an AI, looking at a resume properly designed, won't see that you're a male or female. It won't see what your national origin is. It will actually be able to, if designed properly, pick out the skills if you're qualified for the job and be able to make the decision on that without seeing that. Because you walk into an interview, what's the first thing that the interviewer sees? Everything about you. All things that the EEOC says is illegal, unlawful to make an employment decision on. And now, as a lot of employers are using apps to do the first round of interviews, it eliminates that barrier where so many employees never got a shot because they were in a certain protected group, never got a shot because they were wearing religious garb, never were able to get past that first interview because they were visibly pregnant, visibly disabled. And, in the back of that interviewer's mind, they may be thinking, well, she's pregnant. How much is leave going to cost me? He's disabled. How much is, an accommodation going to cost me? I'm just going to go with somebody else who's equally as qualified, and they're never going to know. And they never got past that shot. But doing an interview on an app, which a lot of companies are doing, asking you actual questions about performing the job and reviewing the transcript of it and having the AI go through and see the way you order your words, the way you respond to the question to see if you actually have the skill for that job in that actual scenario without taking into account what you look like, or if or have a disability, or if you're pregnant, or you're religious. That actually allows employers to take that skills-based approach to hiring without seeing any of those protected characteristics. So you could see how it can really help people. But at the same thing, as soon as I talk about something good, I could talk about a risk. Right. So that same situation I just told you about, right? So let's say, you're applying for a job, the whole interview is on your phone. So they're not going to see what you look like. They're not going to see what your race is. They're not going to see what your religion is, gender, et cetera. But that is now requiring the algorithm to understand what you're saying. So, if you speak fluent English, let's say the algorithm can pick you up 99% of the time. Let's say if you have a thick foreign accent or you're disabled, the algorithm can only pick you up 50% of the time. So you are able to, let's say in that situation where the disabled worker who has a stutter or slur, or the foreign worker who has a thick foreign accent, actually gave a much better interview and would be a much better candidate than the individual who didn't have that. But the computer wasn't sophisticated enough to pick it up. That's national origin discrimination right there. That's disability discrimination right there at scale for everyone who is not speaking fluent English. So you could see, in a sense, how quickly a program designed to allow those workers who may have had bias initially to be able to participate, if it can't account for these foreign accents or disability, it could then quickly, again, scale discrimination when those are the most qualified candidates. So much for each potential use of it. there's a potential risk and there's a potential serious reward in that to get to that skills-based approach to hiring. And like, something I know you know about, like think about job descriptions. Job descriptions have had a lot of historical issues where the more aggressive job descriptions for the bigger positions, men are more likely to apply because even if they're less qualified than a female who is more qualified, they just want to apply. So there's so many words within job descriptions that prevent people of certain protected characteristics from applying. But now there's AI that will go through and look at your job description and compare with hundreds of thousands of job descriptions of who applied and who got the job, and using artificial intelligence going through each line of it and say, if you just change this word, instead of saying, this word, change it to this word, then, the applicants may increase by X amount just by the way of this word. So you could see in a sense that, well, that's a really good use of artificial intelligence because the job descriptions are protected. We're going to go through to make sure that the qualifications, the wording is actually related to the job at hand, or if it discriminates, an AI can help you do that. It can also help prevent discrimination. There's a lot of tools out there as everything gets more digital, as everybody's on Zoom or Teams or Slack or email that prevent you from sexually harassing by sending, a sexually harassing text messages on your computer's network, your work network, or you think about hostile and harassing work environments. It'd say, well, this word may offend, your coworkers who are of this background. So this is how you change it. So instead of a person doing that, the other person getting offended and saying, I'm now in a hostile work environment, they've prevented from that happen and educated you at the same time. So you could see it's not all discriminatory. A lot of it can actually help promote equal employment opportunity, prevent hostile work environments, but it's so much in the design and the use, and it's so much more complicated in our space. And there's just so much more care and caution that needs to go into it for work.
I've got more questions, but the time has gone. This has been a great conversation. I want to ask you, and I know we've got maybe 30 seconds, but what has the EEOC done so far to combat the development or in response to the rapid development of AI? Are there pitfalls that the EEOC has identified for employers and employees?
Yes, we've put out guidance. If you go to our website, eeoc.gov/AI, we have a whole initiative, but we've put out practical guidance for employers and employees on this. And as you know, one of the biggest issues we face at these employment agencies is disability discrimination. So the first guidance we put out was how employees' rights under the Americans with Disability Act may be impacted by AI, by some of these tools. And we talked about how the AI can't screen out people with disabilities. Individuals with disabilities may need accommodation. It can't ask for medical information that is prohibited. And then we also put out guidance related to our longstanding principles on how you can test these programs before you ever actually let it make a decision using longstanding EEOC principles. So we've really tried to promote as much guidance we can for the vendors who are building this, for the employers who are buying this, and most importantly, for the employees who are going to be subject to these tools. It's all on our website, and we continue to evolve and continue to discuss as, ChatGPT, last year, nobody knew about it, and here everyone knows about it. So, what is the next wave of AI and how it's going to impact the workforce? And I've been talking about now how generative AI is going to impact older workers with disabilities, in job displacement and usage of it. So as it continues to evolve, we have to just keep going back to the laws we know and enforce that we've been doing for a long time and saying, here's how it's going to be applied to our longstanding civil rights laws.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us today, for your service in this very important space. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for joining us today. For more information on this topic, or if you believe that you've been a victim of discrimination in a housing transaction, visit us online at www.phrc.pa.gov or call us at 717-787-9780. We're also pretty easy to find online on Facebook, X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. That's it for this edition of PHRC Speaks. Until next time, take care, be good, and be fair to each other.
This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.